Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Today we will talk about oogenesis. The word oogenesis derived from a Greek word which means O means egg and genesis means formation. So the oogenesis means egg formation. So when does it happen? It happens before birth. When the baby is in mother's womb uterus, this diagram shows ovaries. There are certain cells in ovaries which are called progenitor germ cells. These progenitor germ cells, they divide mitotically. They divide by mitosis to form oogonia. Okay, so there are certain progenitor germ cells which divide to form oogonia, 1,000 to million. Now this process continues and then oogonia further divides mitotically to form primary oocytes. So first we have progenitor germ cells which divide by mitosis to form oogonia, and then oogonia further divide by mitosis to form primary oocyte. So first we have progenitor germ cells which divide to form primary oocyte, oogonia, which further divides mitotically to form primary oocyte. No meiosis has yet happened. Now what happened? The primary oocyte starts meiosis. So it starts meiosis. But as meiosis occurs, as the primary oocyte reaches the prophase 1, the diploid stage of prophase 1, it became arrested. So it stops its meiosis at the stage of prophase 1. Now when the baby is born, her ovary contains all the primary oocytes, but they all are arrested in prophase 1. Now this stage continues till puberty. At puberty, what happens? Under the influences of certain hormones, the primary oocyte, so let's first ignore this part. I will explain the oogenesis, then I will explain the ovulatory cycle. Now the primary oocyte, when it is stimulated by certain hormones, it continues its meiosis 1. It is arrested in prophase 1. It continues its meiosis to form secondary oocyte. So here we have secondary oocyte. Now it completes its meiosis 1. So what happened? We have progenitor germ cells which divide to form oocyte, which divide mitotically to form primary oocyte. Now it divides by meiosis to form. Now when meiosis occurs, the cells always divides into two equal daughter cells, but here this does not occur. Here when the primary oocyte divides into two cells, one cells get all the cytoplasm and enlarge, and other cells get small cytoplasm. The chromosomes divide equally, but one cell get all the cytoplasm and other cells contain little cytoplasm. The one cell which contain all the cytoplasm is called secondary oocyte, and one which get little cytoplasm is called first polar body. What is called first polar body? Now what happened when the secondary oocyte now further initiates the meiosis 2? So what happens? Meiosis 1 occurs at puberty. It starts before birth. It is became arrested in prophase 1. Now when puberty happens, under the influence of hormone, it completes its meiosis 1 and it divides to form secondary oocyte and first polar body. Now secondary oocyte initiates its meiosis 2. Now secondary oocyte initiates meiosis 2 to form two cells. Now as it continues, as it starts its meiosis 2, it became arrested at the stage of metaphase 2. So meiosis 2 starts, prophase occurs, but it became arrested or stops at the stage of metaphase 2. Now what happens? The secondary oocyte, if it does not fertilize by a sperm, then it remain arrested at the stage of metaphase 2 and it will degenerate. But what if it fertilized by a sperm? Then what will happen? It continues its metaphase 2 or meiosis 2 and it divides to form two daughter cells, one small and one large. The large daughter cells is called ovum and the small daughter cell is called second polar body. What is called second polar body. So this is oogenesis. what happens, there are certain germ cells which divide to form oocyte. The oocyte divide to form primary oocyte, and this occurs by mitosis. Now this all occurs before birth. The primary oocyte initiates its meiosis 2, but it became arrested at the stage of prophase 1. Now when the baby is born, all the egg cells are arrested in prophase 1. Now what happens when a female reaches her puberty? Under the influences of certain hormones, primary oocyte completed its meiosis 1 and divides to form first polar body and secondary oocyte. Then secondary oocyte, if fertilized by a sperm, it completes its second meiotic division. It starts as second meiotic division but became arrested in metaphase 2. But if it is fertilized by sperm, it will continue its meiosis 2, complete its meiosis 2 to divide into ovum and then second polar body. Then ovum and sperm combine to form zygote. So this is all about oogenesis. Now what are these things that I show? So what happens when progenitor, so this is all oogenesis. Now we will look at the surrounding cells of oogonia, primary oocytes. What are these cells surrounding them and their stages of development? Now what happened when progenitor germ cells divide to form oogonia? They are in the ovary. So this is, for example, ovary. This is ovary. Now certain cells from the ovary surrounds the oogonia. These are called follicular cells. What are they called? They are called follicular cells. Now they surround the oogonia. Oogonia divide to form primary oocyte. Remember, when the primary oocyte is surrounded by follicular cells, then it is called primordial follicle. So primordial follicle is nothing. It is just primary oocyte plus follicular cells. When primary oocyte is surrounded by follicular cells, then it is called primordial follicle. You know, in primordial follicle, the primary oocyte is arrested in the stage of prophase 1. Now what happens when the baby is born? All the primary oocyte are in primordial follicle. They are arrested in prophase 1. Now forget about primary oocyte and their stages of prophase 1, metaphase 1. Just focus on the surrounding cells. Now when the baby is born, all the cells are primordial follicles. Now what happens? So there are 40 to 50,000 primordial follicles. So under the action of certain hormones, a specific number of primordial follicles begin to grow. Now how many? There are about 40 to 50 primordial follicles grow during every menstrual cycle. So what happened? Hormones, the specific hormone is FSH. FSH act on the pool of primordial follicles. There are 40 to 50,000 primordial follicles, out of which 40 to 50 begin to grow. I have only shown one, but there are 40 to 50 primordial follicles which grow. Now the primordial follicle grow, the primary oocyte here, it remains at that stage. Only look at the surrounding cells. So what happens? The follicular cells, they divide excessively to form multi-layered structure. Now what happened? The primary oocyte secretes certain substance. What happened? The primary oocyte secretes certain substance, and follicular cells also secrete a certain substance which is called glycoprotein. So between the primary oocyte and the follicular cells, there is a layer of glycoprotein which starts to accumulate. So this layer of glycoprotein between the follicular cells and primary oocyte, it is called zona pellucida. So what it is called? It is called zona pellucida. So what happened? Primary oocyte surrounded by follicular cells start to grow and they secrete glycoprotein, and oocyte also secrete glycoprotein which accumulates between follicular cells and oocyte, and this layer is called zona pellucida. So first we have primordial follicle which grows, and this stage is called growing follicle. Now when the follicular cells excessively grows and we have zona pellucida between the follicular cells and primary oocyte, then it is called zona pellucida, and this stage is called primary follicle. Now what are these orange structure? We have a certain tissue structure which surround the follicular, and it divide to form a layer of structure outside the follicular cell, which is called theca layer या theca or theca cells. Now the theca cells, we have the outer theca cell layer and the inner theca cell layer. The outer theca cell layer is called theca externa, and the inner theca cell layer is called theca interna. Now what happens, the follicular cells, they divide excessively. So for example, consider these, there are cells, for example, if they divide excessively, they form a certain spaces, between them. Now these spaces, they combine to form a single space. Now here what happened, the follicle cells grows excessively. There are spaces formed between these cells which divide to form a single space. This space is called antrum. And this is a fluid filled space. The fluid comes from the follicular cells. At this stage, when the follicular cells have antrum, a fluid filled space, a theca externa, theca interna, this is called secondary follicle. So first we have primordial follicle which grows, and it is called growing follicle. When we have zona pellucida layer and follicular cells excessively grows, then it is called primordial follicle. Primordial follicle further divides, primordial follicle, no, it's primary follicle. Primary follicle further divides and a fluid filled cavity forms between the follicular cells, and outer layer of theca cells form. This is called secondary follicle. Now remember, in all these layers, the inner cell, the egg cell, is always primary oocyte. Now when this stage occurs, now when secondary follicle forms, the oocyte begins its meiosis 1. Remember, it is arrested at the stage of prophase 1. It suddenly wakes up and completes its meiosis 1. Now what happened? Primary oocyte completes its meiosis 1. When it completes its meiosis 1, it forms secondary oocyte. Here all these blue cells which I have shown in blue color is primary oocyte. The primary oocyte completes its meiosis 1 and it forms the secondary oocyte. Now this layer of structure, or this cell which surrounds the secondary oocyte, is called Graafian follicle. So the Graafian follicle contains secondary oocyte. All the previous follicles contain the primary oocyte. Remember that. Now what happens? The Graafian follicle fuses with the ovary at day 14 of menstrual cycle, and the secondary oocyte is released into the fallopian tube. Fallopian tube is the reproductive structure of female reproductive system. Okay. Now when it is released, it is also released along with the zona pellucida and the follicular cells. The follicular cells, interestingly, they are arranged at the shape of crown. So these follicular cells here are called corona radiata. What are they called? They are called corona radiata. So if this is secondary oocyte, so when ovulation happens, it comes in MCQ, the oocyte is in which state? It is in secondary oocyte. So if fertilization doesn't happen, the secondary oocyte is simply degenerate, and it will be accumulated or eaten by the other cells in the fallopian tube. But if fertilization occurs, if the sperm touches the secondary oocyte, it completes its metaphase 2. Or meiosis 2. So what happens? The primary oocyte here divides to form secondary oocyte. It completes its meiosis 1. Just before ovulation, it starts its meiosis 2, but arrested at the stage of metaphase 2. If the fertilization doesn't occur, the secondary oocyte arrested in the metaphase 2 simply degenerates. But if fertilization does happen, then what happens? If sperm touches the secondary oocyte, then secondary oocyte completes its metaphase 2 and form the ovum, and then the ovum and the nucleus of the sperm combine to form zygote. So what happens to this structure, this Graafian follicle, after the release of secondary oocyte? This Graafian follicles, it converts into the corpus, a yellowish type glandular structure called corpus luteum, and it simply degenerates at the end of menstrual cycle. So to revise it all, what we have studied is there, oogenesis start before birth. What happens? The progenitor germ cells, they divide to form oogonia, which divide to form which are surrounded by layer of follicular cells. The oogonia divide mitotically to form primary oocyte, also surrounded by follicular cells of the ovary. The follicular cells and the primary oocyte combine to form a primordial follicle. At the puberty, the primordial follicle divide to form growing follicle first. Then the growing follicle is called the primary follicle when it is surrounded by the layer of zona pellucida and excessive layers of follicular cells. Then when the fluid filled cavity accumulates between them, which is called antrum, the follicle is called secondary follicle. And at the secondary follicle, what happens? The primary oocyte, in these stages it is primary oocyte. The primary oocyte completes its prophase 1 to form secondary oocyte, meiosis 1. Now what happens? It starts its meiosis 2, but arrested at the stage of metaphase 2. The secondary oocyte is released into the fallopian tube, completes its metaphase 2 or meiosis 2 when it is fertilized by the sperm. If it is not fertilized by the sperm, it simply degenerates, and the remaining Graafian follicles remaining Graafian follicles, it forms the corpus luteum. This is all about oogenesis. Thank you so much.